Hello denizens of the internet, this is Kira Una coming to you today, and today we're going to be exploring a 2,400-year-old plush bird. Come with me on this sewing adventure. So the whole thing started off a few years ago on Tumblr. I believe it started off with Artifacts and Arthropods blog about this plush bird from the Altai Mountains of Siberia. It was described as a felted body with reindeer fur stuffing. Because it was frozen in permafrost, it was incredibly well preserved, which is why it still survives today. You can find more information on this from the Hermitage Museum, the University of Washington, Craft Arch, The Guardian, and the Felting and Fiber Studio. All of these links will be provided in the description box. Now, the date of this, in terms of how old the bird is, it seems to keep moving the more people find out about it. Again, a lot of this is estimations based on other archaeological finds in the area, as it has a lot to do with archaeological sciences, and potentially it will be changed later when it's carbon dated, if that is a feasibility with any given artifact. With that said, humans have always wanted something soft and plushy to squish or to play with during the coldest days of the year. I should know. I speak as a Canadian, where we get up to 6 months of cold, wet, rain, ice, or snow, and it's just part of living up here. As the time of recording, we just had the earliest more than 5 centimeter snowfall in more than 50 years, and it was also still snowing this morning. Anyhow, we'll be going on less of a historical deep dive and more focusing on the construction of my interpretation of this bird, so that way all of you can make one at home for either yourselves as a historical deep dive, or you can give it as a holiday gift for that someone special who happens to love birds. We'll start with the construction and the general idea of the pattern so that you can draw one either for yourself, or once this video goes live, you can go to my Ko-Fi page and download the pattern. The link is here on the QR code, as well as the description box down below. So whenever you're making a pattern for anything, you have to break it down into sections as to how you think a thing was constructed. Now, if we take a look at a few elements, you can see that the stitching is visible on the wings and the seams, as well as the top embroidery on the tail and the wings as well as the eyes were stitched just on top. As everything was hand sewn, we will be hand sewing this as well. Now, if you want to use a machine, you may want to use a butting technique. I realized that there was something that I forgot to mention in terms of this video, like it's not very visual on the previous footage, so I'm going to show it to you now. I'm going to show you a couple of butting techniques. It's essentially something that they used to develop Muppets for, so that the seams were relatively seamless. This is one we also learned in millinery class. Now, ideally, if you're using felt that is a lot thicker than this one, you see how there's a very sharp cut edge, like it's very defined. What you can do for felt is if you butt them together like this, so you can see the cut edges there, but you sew between the layers, so it's a little bit between where you won't see the stitches on the outside, and you essentially do like a midway kind of ladder stitch. It's like a combination of a ladder stitch and a whip stitch, sort of. But if you sew them like this in between the layers, you won't see much of the stitching on the outside of the fabric. And you can continue to whip stitch that together in between layers to keep it closed. Again, I know this might be a little hard to see, but this is why I'm using a contrasting thread. So you can see it on one side. This would be the inside of the item that you're sewing with felt, but that is the outside. And then if you take your needle and kind of fuzz it over very gently, you almost can't tell that there's a seam there. And it's something that they use for Muppet performance puppets and all that sort of thing. So that's why you can't really see any of the seams on Kermit's face. Now, as for the technique I used, this is still going to be the inside. Went with something that might have been done during that time frame. So I did, you sew on top, tuck in underneath, and come out the other side. Kind of almost like an English stitch, but it's not an English stitch. It's similar to or reminiscent of. And what this does is it kind of acts like, say for example, laces on corsetry, where it kind of laces it together. And then every few stitches, you pull it tight. Yeah, it leaves a little bit of a bumpiness, but that's kind of more historically accurate, because if you take a look at the example piece from the museum, you'll see that the stitches are also kind of bumpy. Like, it's something that would have been made back then. And what I did is I did an overcast, just a whip stitch over top every couple of inches just to secure it so that it doesn't come undone easily. Knotted it on the inside, and I kept going. Under, up, to the next side, under, and up. Under, and through, under, and through. And then I just pulled it relatively tight, and that's how you get that seam. Now, there is a mesh part that you can see that was likely used by the conservators to add strength to weak spots to keep it preserved for display. This version I'm making may not be 100% accurate, but I like to think it's a good enough interpretation of the original shapes, or at least within the spirit of the original Swan toy. The colors also won't be super accurate as I'm working with what I've got, and if you want to make one that's more accurate, that is totally up to you. I've taken this grid, which is 1-inch square grids, and overlaid it over top of our bird, and based on the size that it says that the bird is in the museum page, which is about 30 centimeters in height. For the Americans, that's about 11.81 inches, so we'll round that up to about 12 inches in total, assuming that's for the body and not including the wingspan. The beak looks to be about 6 inches long for the entire piece, and the eye is about the size of my fingertip. The skinniest part of the neck is about 1 inch wide, and the really thick part of the neck is about 2 inches wide. The height of the head is also about 2 to 2.5 inches in height. The length of the body, starting from where it starts at that S curve to the very tip just before the tail, is about 12 inches long. And then the tail itself is about 3 inches long. The wings for the upper half is about 8 inches long, that white part there, and the wing tips are about 5 to about 5.5 inches long, getting a little shorter and slightly more skinny up the fingers of the wing as it goes, being about 1 inch wide at the widest part of the flight feathers. During the drafting process, you'll have to look at the slope, the angles, and the curves, and the roundness of certain shapes, especially if they're pieced together as 2D objects, and then stuffing them turns them into a 3D object to round it out. I'll also be adding a bottom gusset that is about 4 to 4.5 inches long that just touches the tail, and about 1.5 inches wide to widen out the base a bit, to make it a little bit more round at the bottom of the bird. But keep in mind, you do not have to do this in your design. The beak is a single piece that, to just make it easier to pattern, I folded the pattern paper in half to get the mirrored piece to cut it all out in one. And as for the tail, I took the top, folded it in half to get the mirror, and then cut out the pieces of paper. And then as for the wingtips, I kind of just sort of winged it. I initially had fabrics out of flannelette picked out specifically for this project, but my apartment seems to like to swallow craft supplies, that is till I find it when I'm not looking for it 6 months to a year later. But luckily I had just enough craft felt to work with here. Now I suggest marking out your pieces in a water-soluble marker or chalk, or just pin the pattern pieces down to the fabric or felt and cut it out carefully. You will want to avoid heat fade markers, as not all craft felt can withstand the heat and you don't want to melt your project, despite that's what I did for this one. So if you're not sure, do a test piece first. For the craft felt that I had on hand, I used 2 pieces in white for the body, 2 for the wings, and 1 for the gusset. In the brown craft felt, you can do all of the rest of the darker pieces as one color, or you can do as I did, where you have 1 piece for the beak, 2 for the eyes, and 2 for the tail, and then the wing tips, you can have them all in black. Now keep in mind you do not have to use all of your leftover scraps and chop them up into fiber coleslaw for this project, like what I'm doing here, but I don't want all of my muslin scraps to go to waste. And if you've seen all of the pattern making that I've done to make a body block that fits me, you will know that I have a lot of muslin scraps to chop up. I'll be using the darker scrappy bits in the beak and tail, and I'll be using the lighter pieces in the body. Now if you have some, you can use wool fiber, cotton stuffing, or poly stuffing for this project. It's ideal to use what you have on hand, as it will be more environmentally conscientious, and it'll look a little bit more rustic if that's the kind of vibe that you're going for. I started with the main body of the swan first, trying to fill it up as I went along, as trying to cram fiber into the skinniest part of the neck will be challenging. I used a blunt end of a pen to help me shove all the scraps I cut up into those nooks and crannies. Now if you're using a sewing machine, be sure to leave space in the gusset to stuff the entire swan. Keep in mind this will be more challenging to do, which is why I recommend that you hand sew this project instead. It's also beneficial to clean as you go so you don't have scrap bits of thread and fiber getting absolutely everywhere. Now, when you're hand sewing this, before closing up the face of the main body, I sewed down the eyes just using a sort of blanket stitch, going through the layers of the white and through the layers of the eye. You can whip stitch this also if you prefer to do so. Now, if you're using a sewing machine, use the satin stitch that you may have seen me do in previous videos to applique it into place. To attach the gusset, there's little notch marks that I made on the pattern as guidelines for where the tips of the gusset will go. Next we'll work on the beak of the bird. You'll want to attach the face end before the little beak bump as indicated on the pattern with the fold that we made in the pattern earlier that makes the pattern piece into a single folded out piece towards the bottom of the bird, aligning it with the seam on the body, and then sew the face down first. Once you have the face sewn in place, you can seam up and stuff the rest of the beak. It's okay if you get a bit of extra stuffing in the cheeks of the beak, and then stitch up the tip of the beak once you have it stuffed enough. The order that you stuff things in is up to you. For the tail, I had attached it to the body before stuffing the body and the tail simultaneously, but I know that will be challenging for some. If you sew the main body first and then stuff and attach the tail afterwards, it may be far easier for a lot of you out there. Sometimes with sewing you have to make up the rules as you go along, kind of like in this video. This process is more like guidelines than actual rules. Ideally, when attaching the tail, you want to align the center of the tail width to the back seam of the body and the center of where the gusset starts on the underside. Next, I started working on the wing tips. After looking at other angles, the wing tips on the original might have been all in one piece, but I did each wing tip individually. I used the wing shape to cut each piece out so it would butt up against the wing base, and I did sort of a cross whip stitch to secure them into place. Once all the assembly was mostly done, I did a running back stitch on the wings with some embroidery floss for the embellishments. Again, you can choose how light or how dark you want to make the veins on the wings and the detailing on the tail to be. I didn't want to go too dark, so I decided to choose a lighter brown instead. As I mentioned previously, I'm not going for 100% historical accuracy here. If you struggle with the top stitch embroidery, you can do the embroidery stage first before sewing the tail together and stuffing it. I just like to apparently make things more difficult for myself for some reason. The last step is to sew the wings into place with the longest part of the wing chops to lay almost parallel to the center back seam of the body. Then, once you've removed all your sewing marks, the bird is done. I hope that you had fun on this historical bird crafting journey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.